Look at this. The P-51 Mustang. The silver-tipped spear that broke the back of the Third Reich. This is the aircraft that pilots called the Cadillac of the skies. The machine that could fly from London to Berlin, sweep the German Luftwaffe from the sky, and fly all the way back. This is the weapon that, in the words of German Air Commander Hermann Göring, signaled the end of the war. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin," he said, "I knew the jig was up." It is, without question, the most famous and celebrated fighter aircraft of World War II. But this is also the P-51 Mustang. Just 2 years earlier, a machine so bad, so profoundly useless in combat, that the Royal Air Force, who had begged for it, refused to fly it against the enemy. They called it a dog, a dud. It was a failure, an embarrassment, a plane that couldn't fight because it couldn't breathe. It was so disappointing, its own creators were ready to abandon it. So, what happened? How did this failure transform into this legend? This isn't just the story of a great airplane. This is the story of a resurrection. It's the story of how one critical, desperate idea, one secret transplant, didn't just save a failed project. It changed the entire course of the Second World War. This is the story of how the P-51 Mustang was born, twice. The year is 1940. The world is on fire. Hitler's armies have crushed Europe. France has fallen. The British Royal Air Force, flying on fumes and courage, has just survived the Battle of Britain. They are desperate. Desperate for planes, for pilots, for anything that can fly and fight. Their primary fighter, the Spitfire, is a miracle, but they can't build them fast enough. They need a partner. They turn to America. The British Purchasing Commission arrives at the headquarters of North American Aviation, a young, ambitious company in California. Their request is simple. Please build the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk for us under license. We will pay you anything. The P-40 was a decent plane, tough, well-armed, but it was already a step behind. And the president of North American Aviation, James Dutch Kindleberger, did the unthinkable. He said no. Kindleberger made a counteroffer that was either insane or the single greatest bluff in aviation history. He told the British, "The P-40 is a 5-year-old design. Don't buy that. Give us 120 days, and we will build you a brand new fighter from a clean sheet of paper. A fighter that is better, faster, and cheaper." The British, stunned by this audacity, agreed. 120 days to design, build, and fly a prototype of a high-performance fighter. In 1940, that wasn't just ambitious, it was impossible. North American Aviation pulled a team of engineers, led by Edgar Schmude, and locked them in a room. They worked 24 hours a day. And they didn't just build a plane, they started a revolution. They ignored the conventional wisdom of the day. They designed an airframe that was pure, streamlined perfection. Its greatest secret was its wing. All other fighters, like the Spitfire and Messerschmitt Me-109, used a traditional wing that was thick at the front. It generated great lift, but also massive drag. The NAA team used a new experimental laminar flow wing. It was thinner, with its thickest point further back. The airflow stuck to the wing's surface for far longer, creating a massive reduction in drag. It was a wing,
built for speed. In a staggering 117 days, the prototype, dubbed the NA-73X, was rolled out of the factory. It was a marvel. It just had one single fatal flaw: its heart. The engine was the Allison V1710. Now, the Allison wasn't a bad engine. In fact, on paper, it was a beast. It was reliable, powerful, and it was the only American-made liquid-cooled V12 available in large numbers. It was the engine that powered the P-40 and the P-38. But it had a secret, just like the wing, only this one was deadly. The Allison engine was designed for low-altitude performance. It used a single-stage, single-speed supercharger. A supercharger is essentially an air pump. It forces compressed air into the engine, allowing it to breathe in the thin atmosphere of high altitude and maintain power. But the Allison's simple supercharger just wasn't up to the job. As the plane climbed, the engine's performance didn't just decrease, it fell off a cliff. At 15,000 feet, the P-51 was a rocket. It was one of the fastest planes in the world. At 18,000 feet, it was okay. At 20,000 feet, it was a dog, as pilots said. It was sluggish, underpowered, and wallowing. And here's the problem. In 1942, the entire European air war, the real dogfights between the Luftwaffe and the RAF, was happening at 25,000 to 30,000 feet. The Mustang, this brilliant, revolutionary airframe, couldn't even get to the fight. The British received their new planes, named them the Mustang I, and were horrified. They had been promised a thoroughbred. They had received a donkey. It was useless as a fighter. The RAF, in their quiet, polite British way, were furious. They banned it from all high-altitude fighter-to-fighter combat. They relegated their revolutionary new plane to low-level reconnaissance, tactical photo recon. They called it TAC-R. It was the aviation equivalent of buying a Ferrari and being told you can only use it to get groceries. The U.S. Army Air Forces were equally unimpressed. They took their version, the A-36 Apache, and turned it into a dive bomber. They slapped dive brakes on those beautiful laminar flow wings and sent it to bomb trucks in North Africa. The story of the P-51 was, for all intents and purposes, over. It was a failure, a brilliant, promising, and utterly catastrophic failure.
But not everyone had given up. In England, in early 1942, a man named Ronald Harker, a test pilot for the Rolls-Royce Engine Company, decided to take a Mustang I for a spin. He wasn't expecting much. He'd heard the rumors. At low altitude, he was shocked. The plane was incredible. It was fast. It was agile. The airframe itself was a masterpiece. He'd never flown anything like it. Then he did what all pilots do. He pointed the nose up. And just as the report said, the engine died. The power evaporated. He described it as feeling like the engine was gasping for air. He landed, confused. He had just flown a plane that was at the same time the best airframe he'd ever flown and the worst fighter he'd ever flown. He understood in that single flight what North American aviation had built. They had built a Formula One car and put a tractor engine inside it. The problem wasn't the plane. It was the heart. At this exact moment, Rolls-Royce was perfecting the greatest piston engine of the war, the Merlin. Specifically, the Merlin 60 series. This engine was a work of genius. It didn't just have a supercharger. It had a two-stage, two-speed supercharger with an intercooler. It was effectively a jet-age piece of technology inside a piston engine. At low altitude, it ran in its low gear, acting like a normal engine. But at a critical altitude of around 18,000 feet, a barometric switch would automatically engage the second high-speed stage. The engine would lurch with a new surge of power. It would take a second breath just as the air was at its thinnest. This was the engine that was giving the new Spitfire Mark IX its edge over the best German fighters. Harker parked the Allison Mustang, walked into his office, and wrote a simple memo, a memo that would change the world. He pointed out the brilliance of the American airframe and the failure of its American engine. And then he asked the single most important what-if question of the war. Why don't we just put our engine into their plane? The idea was met with resistance. It won't fit. It's an American plane. We can't just... The cooling systems are totally different. But the RAF, desperate for any good news, authorized a mad scientist experiment. They gave the Rolls-Royce engineers just five Mustang I airframes. They called the project the Mustang X. It was a Frankenstein job. The Merlin was a different shape, a different size. The engineers had to cut, weld, and hammer the airframe to make it fit. In October 1942, the first Mustang X prototype, its nose now sleek and different, was rolled onto a runway. A test pilot, Tommy Hitchcock, climbed in. What happened next was a miracle. The results were not just good. They were staggering. They were beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Let's look at the numbers, because the numbers tell the whole story. The failure, the Allison-powered Mustang I, had a top speed of 370 miles per hour. It was useless above 15,000 feet. The legend, the Merlin-powered Mustang X, had a top speed of 440 miles per hour. It was 70 miles per hour faster. It wasn't just a fighter. It was a rocket. But that wasn't even the important part. The Allison Mustang had a ceiling of 20,000 feet. On a good day, the Merlin Mustang could climb to 42,000 feet. It could fly 4 miles higher than its predecessor. It wasn't just a better plane. It was, overnight, the best fighter in the world. And it had been created, not in a design bureau, but in a shed in England by a small team of mechanics who had the courage to ask, what if? The British had taken a brilliant American airframe and given it a powerful British heart. And, in doing so, they had created a legend. The news hit the U.S. Army Air Forces like a thunderbolt. They realized, almost too late, what they had. They had a war winner sitting in their junk pile. The order was given immediately. But there was a problem. Rolls-Royce couldn't build enough Merlin engines for its own Spitfires, let alone for a new American plane. So, in another miracle of wartime industry, the Packard Motor Company, in Detroit, the people who made luxury cars, were given the license to build the Merlin engine in America. They retooled their entire factory. They redrew 50,000 blueprints from British to American specifications. They solved the engine's few remaining flaws. The result was the Packard V1650,
a flawless, mass-produced Merlin engine built with American precision. The new American-built plane, designated the P-51B, began rolling off the assembly lines in 1943. It was everything the Mustang X had promised and more. The designers at North American, now re-energized, fixed the plane's last flaw. The original P-51B had a birdcage canopy. The pilot couldn't see behind him. So, they invented the bubble canopy, a single, teardrop-shaped piece of plexiglass that gave the pilot a 360-degree, unobstructed view of the sky. Now, the Cadillac of the skies was complete. The P-51D, the perfect airframe, with the perfect engine and perfect visibility. The failed dive bomber was now the most lethal killing machine in the sky.
And it arrived not a moment too soon. By 1943, the American daylight bombing campaign against Germany was failing. The theory was that B-17 flying fortresses could fly deep into Germany unescorted and defend themselves. The theory was wrong. German fighters, the Me-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, were tearing them apart. The losses were horrifying. On a single raid to Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers, 600 men in one day. The bombing campaign was on the verge of collapse. Why? The American escorts, the P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, they were good fighters, but they were short-legged. They didn't have the range. They could only escort the bombers to the German border. Then they would have to turn back, waggling their wings, leaving the bombers to fly on, alone. And that's when the Luftwaffe would strike. The Americans needed a long-legged fighter. They needed a miracle. And in late 1943, the miracle arrived. The P-51D. With its hyper-efficient wing and 2 external drop tanks, the Mustang could fly from England to Berlin, dogfight for 30 minutes over the city, and fly all the way home. The first time the bombers flew to Berlin with a Mustang escort, the Luftwaffe pilots couldn't believe their eyes. They were used to the American fighters turning back. They came up to attack the bombers and ran headfirst into a wall of P-51s. The result was a massacre, but not of the bombers. The German pilots called it the Day of the Mustang. The P-51 pilots were given a new, simple order. Go find the Luftwaffe, wherever they are, on the ground or in the air, and kill them. They didn't just escort the bombers. They went hunting. They destroyed the Luftwaffe in the air. They dove down and destroyed them on their own airfields. They shredded their planes, their fuel trucks, their pilots. They cleared the skies. They won total air superiority over the heart of Germany. And by doing so, they saved the bombing campaign. They blinded the German army. They made the D-Day landings in Normandy possible. The story of the P-51 Mustang is the story of a second chance. It's a story of a machine that was born a failure, a dog that was cast aside, left to fly in the shadows, its potential completely missed by its own creators. It's a lesson that true greatness is often a combination of brilliant ideas. It took the genius of American manufacturing, the sleek, low-drag airframe of North American aviation, and combined it with the genius of British engineering, the powerful, high-altitude heart of the Rolls-Royce Merlin. It wasn't just an evolution. It was a rebirth. The P-51 Mustang wasn't born a legend. It was made into one. It was a failure that was given a new heart, and in return it flew into history and saved the world.